let's see. I can speak for.
Good afternoon. It's my honor and privilege to moderate this panel with a man of distinction and a role model, the Honorable Carl Bildt, who is the Foreign Minister of Sweden. Carl Bildt has served as Prime Minister of Sweden from 1991 to 1994, and he also served as a Member of Parliament from 1976 to 2001. And his tenure as Prime Minister was marked by his reforms and leadership in modernizing the old welfare system of Sweden and also improving the economic competitiveness of the Swedish economy. As you all know, he's no stranger to international diplomacy. He took the leadership for Sweden's accession to the European Union in 1995. Also, he has taken key positions in the resolution of the Balkan crisis in the mid-90s. So it's my pleasure to give the floor to dear Minister, and maybe we can in today's conversation we will be talking about the NATO summit, what you expect from the ongoing summit, and what are your priorities, and when you go back to Stockholm, what you would like to be seen accomplished in this summit.
Thank you. Great to be here. Sorry to be late. There was some sort of mess in the streets that has happened. And then we were sort of helped at one of the critical junction by a very nice policeman from South Carolina. And he had sort of a knowledge of Chicago that was marginally better than mine. But here we are, and that's the way things are. I mean, just a couple of remarks, and then we can have somewhat more of a discussion. I'm the Foreign Minister of Sweden, as you might have noted. Sweden is not a member of the Atlantic Alliance or NATO, never been. And the reason for that is primarily to do with history. If we go back to the darkest days of the Cold War when NATO was set up, we had a lot of concerns also the position of Finland, which was rather sensitive immediately after the war in the 50s and the 60s. And add to that we also had in those days rather sufficient, has to be said, military capabilities. We were, during the 50s and the 60s and well into 70s and 80s, one of the more well-defined, well-defended territories of Western Europe. We came also indirectly, although that was sort of barely recognized, but de facto recognized. We, of course, came under the US nuclear umbrella in an indirect sort of way. In those days, we called ourselves neutral. We no longer do that. Since 1995, we are a member of the European Union. That means that we are a member of what is a political alliance, and we seek also security in cooperation with other countries, and that has meant quite a change in our security policy orientation. Add to that, of course, that we've developed into one of the key, you can hear that from others, one of the key partner countries for NATO when it comes to stability and peace operations of different sorts. We were there in Bosnia under NATO command. We are still there, limited forces, but still in Kosovo, obviously Afghanistan, which is an ongoing, very demanding operation, as you know, and in Libya, where we were able to make a substantial contribution with our fighter aircraft, primarily in the realm of tactical intelligence. But we also do day-to-day stuff with NATO that is not always that recognized. As we speak, literally as we speak, 5 units from the Swedish Navy are busy outside the port of Tallinn in Estonia in the Gulf of Finland, together with naval units from 11 other NATO countries. And what are we doing there? Well, those are mine-hunting vessels. And as a legacy of the wars, the First World War and the Second World War, there are more than 50,000 mines left in the Baltic. And to clear those is a very long-term important job. And I think during the last few days and nights, we have found and disarmed, I think, 25 mines in the entrance to Tallinn port. The French unit have done good. There's a German unit, there's a Belgian unit, there's a Norwegian unit. These are the day-to-day things that doesn't really catch the headlines, but is really the day-to-day work that our armed forces do together with NATO. It is, of course, as I guess you've been discussing, a new NATO in different respects. And these particular operations is an example of that. But I think I'd like to say for the record that the old NATO is still significant. We are not a member of NATO, but we do recognize the importance of the Article 5 commitment that is there between the United States and the European members of NATO. That does contribute to the overall security of Europe and is of interest, clearly an interest also to those countries that are not members of the alliance. The new NATO is to some extent what I sometimes refer to as a plug-and-play NATO, to take something from the sort of computer world. We don't know in this world of uncertainty which are going to be the tasks that are going to be there. That's difficult to know. Who on earth, certainly not me, expected the Swedish Navy to operate in the Gulf of Aden, expected the Swedish amphibious forces to operate in the desert of Sahara in Chad under EU command, expected the Swedish army to operate in the southern parts of Central Asia in Afghanistan. We did not expect that. And where we'll be in 10 or 20 years, I don't know. You might know, but I don't. What I do know is that we must be ready to work together in the different configuration and utilizing all of the different assets that we might have in order to counter the different challenges that are there and contribute to stability. Often, so far, always, with the mandate and authority of the UN Security Council, sometimes NATO, sometimes EU, sometimes others, and also be able to link in with international organizations, sometimes NGOs, sometimes others, in order to undertake tasks that are well beyond traditional security of the sort that we dealt with in the past. We are living in a very rapidly changing world. I sometimes refer to the somewhat sad fact that I was born in a world where we had 2.5 billion people. You can count backwards. We now live in a world where there's 7 billion people. Quite a change. And by the middle of this century, there will be roughly 9 billion people. We Europeans, if I take that particular perspective, are going to be 7% of those 9 billion people. And in contrast to what was the case in the past decades when these population figures, there's us rich up there and masses of poor down there, that is no longer going to be the case. Because we see hundreds and hundreds of millions and even billions of people rising up from poverty into a global middle class that is developing from Shanghai to Sao Paulo. Enormous opportunities, but also enormous strains in the global political system. And we do see that the very concept of security is changing. The old concept of security, and note that I said in my remarks on Article 5 that is still relevant. The old concept of security is really that you have a border. And on the one side is you, and the other side is the potential enemy, and then you have your army and all of the other stuff to prevent those from coming across the border. You defend the territory, and it was defense of the territory that defended the nations and your people and your freedom. Still relevant, but increasingly the well-being of our societies is much more dependent upon what comes across the boundaries. We live in an age of globalization, an age of interdependence, an age of working together, where we need to protect the trade flows that are increasingly important. Without those particular trade flows, we don't have the possibility of prosperity, of people coming out of poverty. And that is a new task. We see the flows of people coming across the borders and the boundaries. That needs to be protected. We see increasingly, of course, the cyber flows, our dependence on each other in a world that is moving very rapidly to hyperconnectivity, where we must be able to protect, safeguard, perhaps even defend the networks of connectivity that are increasingly important to nearly everything, from Facebook to fighter aircraft, I was going to say, in our modern world. So protect the good flows and also to counter the bad ones. Organized criminality, drugs. See what the warfares between drug gangs, the cartels in Mexico and Central America are doing. There are on an annual basis more than 3 times as many killed in the war between the drug cartels in Mexico as there are in the war in Afghanistan. And this might spread to elsewhere. Look at Central Asia. Look at what's happening in parts of South Asia. We need to be very much concerned with that. That means that we must have the preparedness to work together in a way that perhaps was not the case before. Not giving up on the territorial defense, whether we are in NATO or outside of NATO, but being able to plug and play with the different challenges that are going to be there. And that's why, from my perspective, from Sweden's perspective, the important thing that happens here in Chicago is, sorry to say, not the NATO summit going on, it's very important, needless to say. And we're going to have a meeting on ISAF Afghanistan tomorrow, which is to a large extent going to confirm what we've said previously, but it's going to be important anyhow, because we confirm it at a slightly higher level. But from our point of view, the meeting that we're going to have tomorrow afternoon with those countries that are somewhat more advanced as partners of NATO in these different new tasks, be that Australia, be that Sweden, be that Finland, or be that some of the countries of the Middle East, the United Arab Emirates, to just take one example. That does establish, that confirms the new ways of working together that are truly necessary in the truly new world that we are facing now. So that's just some remarks initially, and then questions and discussion.
Thank you, Minister. We should note that Chicago is considered as the Swedish capital of Northern America, so I don't think you feel...
No, but we've given up all territorial claims. It's okay. It's okay.
I have 2 quick questions, and they're more general, but we can, of course, approach the question from the NATO perspective. Now, the Eurozone has been facing a serious problems in its economy, and we don't know the...
Well, not quite true. Not quite true. The Eurozone is, 13 countries? Some of them are doing extremely well. I mean, if I look at the Eurozone countries that are close to me in geographic terms, Finns are doing well, the Estonians are doing well, the Germans are doing well. Everyone that I know in my vicinity are doing extremely well. There are some others that are doing somewhat less well. Yeah. But it's more a problem of countries, inside or outside of the Eurozone, by the way, that have perhaps not been managing their economic affairs in a proper way.
Yeah, let me reformulate my question. Maybe the global economic downturn.
That's true.
How it would affect the cooperation on security issues within the EU and NATO framework, or in general, how you think the economic challenge is going to affect the future of cooperation? Is it an opportunity for the future, for the cooperation in the future, or is it a serious challenge? And my second question is, then we can maybe, if you want to ask questions, you can go on behind the microphone, and I can recognize you after my second question. Yeah. Is you are a very active user of social media tools, and maybe you are one of the rare politicians that are personally using it, and with 125,000 followers. How do you think the role of social media for the future of participatory democracy, and how we could utilize social media tools to mitigate the future security challenges, global security challenges? That's my second question.
2 good questions. First, on the impact of the economic crisis. Well, of course, it might have some impact on the countries that are now in sort of acute deficit situation, and will have to cut back on public expenditure, defense not being excluded from that. You see that in the US. There was $500 billion taken from the defense budget. And if you listen carefully to those who follow the US financial and political debate, they think that's only the beginning of what might be necessary. But I would argue that what is necessary as we look at the future is less those absolute levels and more the way in which we change the way we operate with those particular levels. It's always a problem with, be that defense forces or some other things, that we have a legacy. We have legacy systems. We have legacy thinking. Some of that is relevant, but a lot somewhat less relevant. So it is our ability for transformation that is key. And it might even be, to say something that is outside of the normal in a circle like this, it might even be that some pressure on budgets might make it easier to go out of the old legacy systems and into the new. Social media, in general terms, I think it is truly a new word. I mean, there are more internet users in China than in the United States. There was a lot of discussion on the impact of the social media on the Arab Revolution. That was an element of hype in it, but still it was not irrelevant. I think it's far more relevant what you see in China today. As an example of what I sometimes phrase as sort of a battle between hierarchies and networks. And in that particular battle, in the battles between hierarchies and networks, in my opinion, will nearly always win. There was, if you go back in time, the old George Orwell 1984 vision of a society where the center could control everything by the modern technology. That's so far not the case. The ability of the center to control is less. There is more ability for people to get information and to break through and do different things, and that's going to transform a lot of things. Might create some more instability now and then, but over time, I think it's going to be a better world.
Thank you, Minister. I will take one question from each microphone, so I start with this microphone now. Please don't forget to introduce yourself before your question. Thank you.
My name is Hugh Vonderchek. I'm from the University of Illinois at Chicago. And my question involves sort of the changing nature of Swedish society domestically, and especially in light of the very violent pushback against an influx of non-ethnic Scandinavians in Norway in the last year, and whether the same sort of demographic changes and pushback are seen in Sweden, especially with the election of a more conservative domestic parliament in the last 2 years.
Well, as you know from the debates in this country, immigration is not always an easy subject. But if you look at what's been happening in Sweden, it's quite spectacular. Sweden is now the country in the European Union that, if you take away some oddities in the statistics, is the country that has the highest numbers of people that are born outside the European Union. And that's a very big change that has happened in our society during the last, say, 20 years. Much bigger than I think anyone anticipated. Do we have people who oppose it? Yes. We have a political party that had the parliament last time, which I got, I think, 5%, or what it was, 5 or 6%, or whatever it was, in the election. But what we see when we do a polling is that people have become more positive to immigration in our society. They value the positive changes. I'm saying that without saying that there aren't people who are opposed. There are always people who are afraid of the new, afraid of what is foreign, afraid of what is different, afraid of what is not what it used to be in the old times. But overall, I think we have been so far managing this enormous change fairly well. And, has to be said, this is in all probability only the beginning.
Please.
Thank you. Iveta Cherneva from Bulgaria. Mr. Bildt, det är jättetrevligt att vara här. Tack så mycket. My question is very quick. NATO is centering itself around smart defense, sharing and pooling. Nordic countries have done this for a long time. Any lessons, if any?
Yeah, well, yes, well, yeah. I mean, first, we all talk to smart defense as if we did stupid defense before. I mean, I would like to believe that we had smart defense all the time. But, of course, things are changing. Threats, so far as there are any threats, are very different. And we need to work together. We are doing that quite a lot now in the Nordic countries, much more than we did before. And that is between, I mean, what you have up there, you have sort of Norway and Denmark that are members of NATO. We have Sweden, not. Finland, not. We have the 3 Baltic countries. We have Iceland as a member of NATO without any defense forces whatsoever. And what we're doing is working much more together. We are sort of pooling our surveillance assets, air and sea. in a way which we couldn't do and didn't do before. We have our military units training together, our air forces up in the north, for example, in a way that was unthinkable in the past. We have some of our units training together, and we are discussing the different challenges as is concerned the development of forces in a way we didn't do before. But it's very much work in progress. And we want to be even smarter in our approach to security.
Please.
Bart Treftrick from Washington, D.C. Mr. Minister, my question is on Bosnia. I know Bosnia is not high on the international agenda, but it's near and dear to your heart, given your role as High Representative of Bosnia and your overall leadership on this issue. Where do you see Bosnia heading over the next 10 years? The situation is relatively dysfunctional, as it has been over the past 3 years when the international community sort of recently rallied on this topic. And maybe 3 sort of subparts. So do you think the EU should exercise bond powers or have the power to exercise bond powers in Bosnia, let's say after the High Representative office is closed? The EU is exercising authority in Greece, which would be traditionally domestic, but seems very uncomfortable with this idea. And if you could just define the European interest in Bosnia. Is there a European interest in Bosnia? How do you communicate to your Swedish constituency when you discuss Bosnia? What is at stake in Bosnia for the EU? Thanks very much.
I mean, first, we are not exercising any powers in Greece, sorry to say. What's happening in Greece is that we are putting at the disposal of the Greek government. That includes the international financial institutions, an amount of money that is equivalent to 177% of the Greek GDP, in order to make it possible for them to stay away from the demands of the international capital markets for such a period that they can readjust their economy. And it's a huge sum of money. I mean, the Marshall Plan was 2.5% of GDP. We are now talking about 177% of GDP in different sort of aid to Greece. If they want to do it, they can do it. If they don't want to do it and use it, that's them. Bosnia, I mean, our interest in Bosnia is, of course, a fairly fundamental one. It's the basic interest in peace in Europe. And the basic way of safeguarding peace in Europe, I mean, in past it was a military deterrence. Now the way to safeguard peace in Europe is essentially political and economic integration. That applies to Bosnia inside Bosnia and Bosnia in the region and the region inside the European Union. Then Bosnia is a complicated society, needless to say. But it's not the only complicated society in Europe. There are quite a number of them. And you could say, if you simplify things quite a lot, and if you are somewhat undiplomatic, that Bosnia is sort of somewhere in between Cyprus and Belgium. Cyprus so divided that it is since either 1963 or 1974, completely divided. And we've not been able to bring them together at all. Belgium works, 7 different parliaments, takes some time. Took even longer time to form a government in Belgium than it did in Bosnia, as a matter of fact. But it does work, sort of. And tensions, and if you look at the elections, our task is there's no risk of Bosnia going off in the other direction. How fast can we take it in sort of the Belgian direction? I mean, no question is moving in that direction. I would like to go faster, so would you. But as said, they managed now, it took some time for them to set up the government of the last election, faster than Belgium. That's only something. But more important, they did it all by themselves. And they were very proud of it. They said, now we've set up a government without any interference or help or assistance by the international community. And that's a sign of things moving. That also indirectly answers your questions. Do I want the European Union to exercise authority? No, I want Bosnia to be a democracy. And democracies take the decisions themselves. And if we take decision-making away from them, we also take responsibility away from them. And people that you take responsibility away from, they tend to act in an irresponsible way. And that needs to be avoided.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Seth Johnston. I'm from the United States. Sir, my question may not be entirely original, but you did mention that, and I think very persuasively, summarized the value of Sweden's many contributions to NATO And you also mentioned that Sweden perhaps departed from its long-standing tradition of non-alignment when it joined the political alliance of the European Union. In view of those two facts, is there any serious discussion of Sweden pursuing membership in NATO, and under what conditions might that occur?
Not really at this time, no. I mean, go back during the period of the Cold War. Then you could argue that this is a very important decision, make a hell of a lot of difference, whether we were members or not members. We decided not to apply for membership. And that was a policy that was widely supported. In my opinion, it was a very wise policy that had to do with sort of the balance and the strategic situation up in the north of Europe. And we managed to preserve Northern Europe as an area of somewhat lower tension than would otherwise have been the case. Then we did have very strong defense forces, and we did have an element of cooperation with NATO and the United States that is now coming to the more to public attention than was the case when it was secret. Now you might argue that it doesn't make that much of a difference. I mean, we lose somewhat in terms of not having sitting around the table at the NAC. Yes, we do. There might be other advantages with being outside. But in order to take that particular big step, you need a fairly big consensus in society. We don't have that. And the same, I think, applies to Finland. We go very much together. So our policy is geared to being where we are, developing the practical coordination, cooperation with NATO, with the Nordic countries, and with the other partner countries that is necessary in the different situation that we might encounter. So that's roughly where we are, and I think we are fairly happy with the situation as it is.
Thank you, Minister. Unfortunately, we ran out of time, so we won't be able to take more questions. But on behalf of Young Atlanticists, we would like to thank you for taking time in this busy schedule and coming here and sharing your remarks. Thank you.
Thanks very much.